Hi, I'm Bill from CJ Pony Parts. There's a lot of stock components on the Fox Body Mustang that can barely handle the factory horsepower output, and one of them is going to be the factory control arms. The stamped steel arms with the rubber bushings can barely handle the 225 horse these cars make stock, and as you add power, they're only going to get worse. Our 92 GT is mildly modified, but it makes a little more horsepower than stock, and the factory arms have over 90,000 miles on them, so they would upgrade to these tubular control arms for both the upper and lower. The upper-lower control arm's job is to keep the rear centered and planted during acceleration. These arms here are going to be what I would consider one step up from your stock arm, an excellent replacement for a mild car like a weekend cruiser. They're going to be tubular, so they'll be a lot stronger than the stamped steel, and have polyurethane bushings, which will be much better than the rubber. The kits can include 2 lower arms, 2 upper arms, and necessary hardware for installation. For this installation, let a lift and a pole jack or a jack and jack stands, a 3/8 ratchet, 10mm socket, 13mm socket, 18mm socket, 19mm socket, extension, 18mm wrench, 19mm wrench, small hammer, and a pry bar. The first thing you want to do for the installation is get the car up in the air, and we're going to remove the sway bar itself from the lower control arms. I can't stress this enough, you're going to want to do 1 control arm at a time. You definitely don't want to do 2. It makes it a lot harder to get the rear lined up. Once we do this, we'll support the control arm and we'll start with the lowers. Our new guy Freddie is going to handle the installation, and I'm going to walk you through it. In our case, we do have an aftermarket sway bar with different hardware. If you have a factory sway bar, it's just going to have bolts on the outside with inserts and bar itself. Now we're going to support the control arm. We're going to start by removing the rear bolt, then we can lower the control arm down and lower the spring as well. Now we're going to lower the control arm down and remove the spring. Now with the spring out, there's no pressure. We can move up front or remove the front bolt. Now removing the front bolt, depending on your car, sometimes the muffler might be really close to the frame. You may have to remove the muffler to get to these bolts. While it springs out, it's a good time to take a look at your spring isolators. Ours are obviously brand new, but if they're worn out, it's a perfect time to replace them. Now we're ready to install our new lower arms. Before you install them, just put a little grease on the surface of the bushing. Makes it easier to go in, plus it'll protect the bushing. What we'll do now is just get the bolts hand tight for the front. Then we'll put everything back together. We actually don't want to tighten everything all the way up yet. We'll do that later. The lead spring up into place, and again, make sure the edge, the bottom coil of the spring is facing towards the back of the car. This is going to be pretty common. It's going to be off like this, and again, why I'm saying to do 1 at a time. It's much easier to try to get 1 hole lined up than get them all lined up. All you'll do here, put a pry bar or lift, and just kind of move the rear into position. Now we're going to tighten up the front bolt. The rear bolt we actually won't tighten until the car's back on the ground so it doesn't bind up. Okay, with the lower done, now we can move on to the upper. We're going to support the rear, basically just to hold it in place, then start breaking the bolts free. Sometimes the upper bolt can be tough to get off. What we're going to do now is just take off the lower bolt. That way the arm will be loose and make it easier to get the bolts out. All right, now we can remove our upper control arm. After putting a little bit of grease on the new and the original bushing on the differential, we're ready to install the upper arm. We're going to use the new hardware provided in the manufacturer. And sometimes with these, you might want to move the jack to the differential center as opposed to the axle. Whatever you got to do to basically make it line up and put it back together. All right, now we're going to repeat the process on the other side. Okay, with all 4 control arms mounted, now we can put the sway bar back into place. It's going to go on the outside of the control arms. Okay, once all 4 on, we can tighten them down. Depending on what sway bar you're running, you want to take a look at the hardware you're using. In our case, when we went to put the nuts on with the lock washers, we noticed the hole was almost the size of it, so we're going to put some extra washers on there just for safety. Now we'll get the car back on the ground, get weight on the rear tires, then we'll come up, tighten these bolts down, and your installation's finished. Our tubular control arm set with the polyurethane bushings will do a great job of putting the power to the ground on our 1992 Mustang GT. As Freddie showed you, the installation's not too bad, so it's a little bit time consuming. Some of the bolts are kind of hard to get to, but give yourself 2 to 3 hours and be back on the road in no time.